I said no slides. I've just been playing around because I want to bring up something that I find fascinating. I just want to see if I can. I'm just going to share my screen just for a moment. A second. It's having said that, yeah, that's right. Fine. Can you just see that for a second? Can you see that on the screen? This was in 2019 in Paris. Welcome to smart cities of the future, smarter connections. And it's French, so it's sexy, and it is chic, and it is smooth, and it is the new mega regions, and it is decarbonizing the cities and digital transformation. And what not one single person mentioned in Paris during this conference, that exactly 1 year before that, Paris had been underwater, and not one person mentioned it. And the truth of the matter is that is what cities are going to look like. That is what cities are going to look like. Now, not as an anomalous event, but because that's what cities are. And certainly cities by rivers and cities on bridges, that's what they're going to look like. And nobody seems to mention, I mean, in the UK, in London, for London, which is basically in a basin, flooding is the number one environmental risk, serious flooding. We have 18 tier 1 accident and emergency hospitals, every single one of which has an emergency generating system, every single one of which is in the basement. And you're starting to think, okay, we need to start, surely we've moved beyond this. So now that's not a crisis. That's the way we're going to live. That's the way we're going to live. Cities underwater. Houston, Texas, in the snowstorms a couple of years ago. Houston is the 4th largest city in the world, in America. Texas is the 9th largest economy in the world. Its economy is bigger than Canada. It's bigger than South Korea, bigger than Brazil. And in 3 days, it went off grid because of a snowstorm. But if you look at the snowstorm, if you're from Milwaukee or Minnesota, or if you're from Ukraine or Sweden, and you go, man, you think that's a snowstorm? Bro, you got to come over here and see a snowstorm. And the problem wasn't a snowstorm, it was the snowstorm in Texas. And I discovered a new word, winterization. And what they said was we hadn't winterized our frameworks, our infrastructures. But the thing about it is if you use the last 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 years as the way of extrapolating into what we're doing with now, that doesn't work. We have to deal with a new reality. So as we're sort of moving into the last part of the program, let me ask you a question. Do we recognize what this new reality, Andrew, I'll give you another example from Australia, for example. Australia is basically a continent without water. I mean, it's not water management. It doesn't have water. It's basically a dry continent. We saw Cape Town getting within 3 days of day zero, losing water. We've never yet lost a major city. We've come close twice, or more than that. But the two ones that I know about or talk about is Cape Town and day zero. And of course, Tokyo with Fukushima 2011, when there's a radioactive cloud coming out of the TEPCO Daiichi nuclear power station and literally moving towards Tokyo. Andrew, and we know this is being recorded here. Are we going to lose a city in the next 5 years? Are we going to lose a major city, do you think?
Before I answer that question, I'd just like to make one comment about the impact of academics on.
Yeah, please, feel free to rip off. Absolutely.
It's really interesting because if we were having this subject with a group, this discussion with a group of business people or engineers or lawyers or doctors or ecologists, they wouldn't be making the separation. It's something that I really notice in the emergency management field. So I'm just going to post. We've recently had a research project done, and it's been released, the Australian Fire Danger Rating System. It's the first time they've revisited the science, but equally as importantly, they've revisited how people think. So the communication message has been based on communication theory. Now, our communications people within our emergency management agencies, they're practitioners, but they are communications practitioners that work in an emergency setting. For them, the fact that they're drawing on theory is just the way they do their job. And I think that's a really interesting discussion in this space. And you David, know that I like any opportunity to go and study something. One of the problems that I see is it's that, and I think it was Natalia again. Yes, there's the lack of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches. So having sat as the emergency management advisor on major infrastructure builds, when those engineers are saying we're going to do A, B, and C, and the fire department saying, well, we can't get down into that area, they're saying, well, we've already built systems in place as long as they work, but that's true of any situation. That means you won't have to do that. So we've come up with a system that means you won't be reliant on a BA system the way you once were, because you can now plug into different pipes and reticulation for air availability. So when they're designing these things, they're already having these discussions. It's part of the fundamental design processes that they would follow, whether they're designing an underground bunker or whether they're designing somebody's house. The standard ways that they go through their design process. So I think it's real. I've always find this interesting about where do the academics sit. There's that whole discipline of academics that are on both sides.
Andrew, can I come in? Because I want to come in, because otherwise I will forget it, and it's important, and it's incredibly interesting to everybody, I'm sure. But I want to say, the thing about it is the difference between us as emergency managers, crisis management, whatever you want to call it, and the oncologists and the architects and the designers, we do not have a body of knowledge.
Correct.
They have
no common body of knowledge. No recognised common body of knowledge.
A 60-story building, there's a way that you do that. If you want to be a doctor, there's a way you do that. If you want to build an aeroplane, there's a way that you do that, and you've been taught how to do it. We haven't. And, I've been having this conversation for 30 years. I was on the very first Home Office steering committee for privatisation, so regulatory of the private security sector, about 1996, 97. And we discussed a body of knowledge, because that was my thing then. Nothing's happened 30 years later, nothing's happened. Why don't we have a body of knowledge? And I know that we're riffing, but I said that we would riff off. And it's a question I'm going to ask all of you. Why don't we have a body of, and why do we still allow ex-colonels and ex-majors and ex-chief superintendents in military or police departments to suddenly become our senior risk officers and our senior crisis managers? Andrew, I'll come to you briefly, and then we'll go around the table on that.
Certainly within the Australian setting, one of the problems is that we confuse emergency response with emergency management. Like going and responding to the fire is one aspect of emergency management. It's a much bigger beast. And my observation would be in many, like my master's in emergency management was very much through a UN lens. We looked at the economic and political ramifications. We looked at community development. We looked at public education campaigns and education, not just public awareness campaigns. So that was a very different, and I look at other people that are largely learning risk tools, very basic risk tools, often informed by the business literature rather than a much bigger set of literature. So we've got nothing in there that we've actually decided this is what we want people to learn. I think that's a fundamental issue. And we made the comment earlier before, like Boris Johnson, we're going to defeat this. If you go back to the 1950s, 75% of your politicians had been in the military. They used military analogies because it had meaning for them. Now we use it as a byline. Yeah. It looked like a war zone. Well, you've never been to a war zone. You wouldn't know what a war zone looks like. And it's a great way of trying to rally people. And I nearly said rally the troops, inappropriate analogy. It's a great way of rallying people because it, particularly for the UK, it's harking back to Churchill's speeches and bringing people together. But the people that are making these speeches, they're no longer connected to it. And one of the reasons we go to the military in Australia, in a lot of cases we bring in somebody, the core reason they're brought in is they're all trained in logistics and planning. So they know that they have a common body of knowledge about this is how you plan and this is how you run a logistics operation. And in a lot of cases, the problems that they're dealing with is we need to plan and we need to run logistics. May not be the most effective way of doing it, but they've all got the same way of doing it. Whereas in a lot of cases, the emergency management people don't have those extensive planning backgrounds. That would be the observation that I make.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I mean, the thing about it is if they don't have the background, then surely the training and education process should have allowed them to have that background. I mean, we should say, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to know. and we have a process of educating you effectively. I mean, it's not.
Before we shut the Australian Emergency Management Institute, the College at Mount Macedon, I won't talk about that. The number of times I would ask the audience there, which had people who were firefighters, flood specialists, how many of you joined your organisation because you had an undying desire to spend hours planning and writing plans, doing evaluations and doing a lot of paperwork? They never put their hands up. They joined those organisations to deal with the hazard that they joined to deal with. And the same was true for the police and the military people. And I think there's this lack of recognition that one of the roles of managers is to plan. So if you're going to call yourself a manager of anything, emergency, security, medical, hospitals, whatever, that's a core function of managers. We know what those functions are. The management literature covers extensively what those functions are. If you're going to be an emergency manager or a crisis manager or a hazard management manager or an ecology manager, they're things that you should have learnt. And if you haven't learnt them, there's a problem fundamentally with the way your organisation runs and the way that the discipline functions.
Okay, so organisation, that's a good word because we all work with organisations. Can I just ask, I want everybody to put a thumbs up if what I'm going to say is right. How many of you love what you do? So everybody in the audience, just in the chat, put a thumbs up. If what I'm saying is right, put a thumbs up. Or yes, just write yes. How many loves what you do? Okay, we're getting that. That's good. I'm glad. And I think we're passionate, right? How many, right, we're going to stop that now to ask another question. How many of you, when you come into the office in the morning, you get your cup of coffee and you're going to make the world a better place, and within 10 minutes, you realize you spent 80% of your time wrestling with your own goddamn organization that is trying to stop you doing exactly the things that it told you it wanted you to do. And basically, rather than making the world a better place, you wrestle with your own goddamn organization and non-stop. Yes, with bells on it. I can actually feel the emotional intensity coming across. You see, we're getting double thumbs up. You see, and that is the case. It is the case. So we talk about the organizations, but actually, the organization won't allow us to do what it is that it's told us it wants us to do, and we spent all of our time bloody fighting it. Avgoustinos, there you go. I'm sure we've given you plenty to think about and talk about. Organizations, the bane of our life. How do we make our organizations better? How do we influence our organizations?
Oh, it's a difficult one. We need people with the power to influence. Sometimes those with great authority do not listen because they are doing what they used to do. And this is a big problem. It's a big problem, organization problem, and systemic issue. We need to educate those people on those key places, and we need to change the foundation of the core beliefs to understand that it's a new reality. And it's all about spreading the message and communication. It's a multi-parameter thing. How do we change the aspects of organization? It's not one person's job. It's a teamwork. It's a team play, and that it's a thing that. Excuse me for a second. I will try to auto translate in my head. Get it in English. We need to understand that if we want to survive this new reality, we need to work holistically and with each other and ensure that those in key places know what to do. And decision-making must be done by people that are aware of the risks. I don't know if I answered to your question fully.
It is. I mean, it is because we do want to have those three things, and I say this in every context. What we want to do, what you want to achieve, what everybody listening here wants to achieve, what everybody around us wants to achieve is three things: influence, impact, and legacy. We want to move the dial. We want to feel that we've made a difference, and it doesn't have to be a big difference. But it just has to move the dial, and that seems incredibly frustrating. And what's frustrating, we're actually moving towards the last section now, last stage of it. Let me come to you, Sherrod. What are the main differences that you've seen sort of across the Caribbean region? As you said, the University of the West Indies is doing stuff. CDMA is doing stuff. Excellent work, really. There's a really quite very well educated, established, capable top-level tier, isn't there? I mean, from my experience working with these people, they seem to be comfortable in their jobs. They know what they're doing. Is there the structure to support that? I mean, do we have, is that deep-rooted? And have you seen a genuine difference in capability and resilience over the last 10 years, for example?
Definitely. Within the last 15 years, I think because of the way the nature of how CDMA came to being with all of the heads of the region signing on and making it legal, what we've seen is a creation of a platform where we have cross-training. So as opposed to, because when we interact, for example, with the UN system and so on, it's a different for them coming in that they realize that our military is actually integrated into our disaster risk management. So they're actually trained in humanitarian aspects. And CDMA has been pushing for the last several years with the establishment of the civil military coordination cell. Not with just the regional militaries, but the other international militaries that are usually within the region, the US, the French, the UK, the Dutch, etc., and so on. It had its transitional issues at first because those international militaries were coming in from a more that aspect and so on, and coming into the region where now the military heads, etc., and so on, and they were actually trained in the humanitarian aspect in disaster management and integrated into the disaster management mechanisms. Even our regional security mechanism, which is made up of persons from the security forces from the different countries, being trained in that aspect, that facilitated an environment for us to actually start changing and moving in direction and pulling in the other regional entities that had other areas of focus. So, for example, our regional Met institutions, CIMH and so on, pulling in the Met persons to start being trained in that aspect, our telecommunications, our health, etc. Because it came from us being very small states with very limited resources, not recognizing that we couldn't do it on our own and being in a very vulnerable area. That actually allowed us to actually set that platform. So we've seen a change in that environment, and it's actually increased over I would say the last maybe 15 years. I've seen where we see now that this is now being instituted into the training level for persons going into these particular fields. Whereas now, where it used to be like a one-off training, it's now being integrated into the curriculum in which they understand. So when they understand how the regional security system functions, how the CDRU, the CDMA Disaster Relief Unit functions, and how they are part of that. How the rapid damage assessment and needs assessment and so on, and how all of these other areas, which would traditionally in other parts of the world, because they're larger institutes and so on, and they function separately, for us in the Caribbean, because of that limited human resource, that physical resource, the financial resource and so on, it's taken more of a consolidated approach, and it has allowed us to adapt to that form of functioning more so, I would say. But it's definitely picked up. I remember when CDMA started the Civil Military Coordination Unit, it was a challenge for militaries coming in to understand how the regional military was already part of the humanitarian thing, because when they did the training, they did have it compartmentalized. Military was military operations, humanitarian was humanitarian operations, and then coming into the region, it was a bit of a transition for them.
I mean, we saw that sort of the lack of clarity about the function of the military as a support agency, who of course have specific skills and capabilities which probably nobody else has. We saw that very clearly in Hurricane Katrina 2005, when the National Guard were brought in and they treated it like little Somalia. They said, we're going to take this city back from the insurgency. But you saw young National Guard kids walking around, I mean, literally in full combat gear with their helmets on. You had armored personnel carriers, literally with weapons cocked. And he goes, seriously, guys, you've been given the wrong briefing. You think you're in Kirkuk. You're in New Orleans here to help people. So the fact that often you throw resources in at the last minute, and we've seen this in you talk about humanitarian, Sherrod, as we know, the main crisis in this humanitarian response is the last mile. You can bring all this stuff in, but then it's distribution, and then that just breaks down